They thought freedom was within reach. 8 fugitives on the run, each move carefully planned: stolen cars, hidden safe houses, and new identities waiting just across the border. They were ready for anything. Except her. When they saw a lone woman running through the woods, they thought she was an easy target. Just another victim. Just another way to cover their tracks. But they had no idea who they had taken. Naomi Cole wasn't just any woman, she was a Delta Force commander. A soldier forged in war zones, trained to survive the impossible. What started as a kidnapping would become their worst nightmare. Their plans would fall apart. Their allies would crumble. And the hunters? They would become the hunted. Before we dive in, tell me, where are you watching from? And if you love thrilling stories like this, hit subscribe now so you never miss one. Naomi Cole's steady breaths matched the rhythmic pounding of her feet against the dirt trail. The crisp, morning air filled her lungs as she pushed herself forward, her body moving on instinct. This was her escape, a moment of peace, far from the chaos she had spent years surviving. The national park stretched for miles, thick with towering trees and winding paths. It was empty this early, just the way she liked it. No one to watch, no one to interrupt. But today, something felt wrong. A shadow flickered between the trees. Quick. Silent. Naomi's instincts kicked in. She didn't react, didn't break stride. But she knew someone was there. Her heartbeat remained steady, her breathing controlled, but her mind was already analyzing. The forest had been alive with sounds just minutes ago. Birds chirping, insects buzzing. Now, silence. Ahead, an SUV sat at an odd angle, half hidden near the tree line. Its dusty surface and barely visible plates sent a warning through her gut. She slowed, pretending to check her watch. Scanning, calculating. Then footsteps. A sharp crunch behind her. She turned. A man lunged. Naomi pivoted fast. His hands reached for her, but she sidestepped, letting his own weight pull him forward. He stumbled, cursing, but before she could act, more figures stepped from the trees. 2, 4, 6, 8. Their clothes were dirty, ripped. Some wore old prison uniforms, others stolen jackets. One clutched a rusted crowbar, another a hunting knife. Their eyes were sharp, hungry. One man stepped forward. Slicked back hair, worn leather jacket. The leader. He smirked, confident. No need to run. You're exactly what we need. Naomi didn't flinch, didn't speak. Her stance remained neutral, her breathing even, but inside, she was already working through the scenario. 8 men. Armed, but untrained. Scattered, but not careless. She wasn't carrying a weapon. No phone. No backup. Escape? Impossible. Not yet. The leader tilted his head, watching her. You're a long way from help. He expected fear. Expected her to beg, maybe try to run. Instead, Naomi met his gaze, calm and unreadable. Seems like you're the ones with the problem. A few of them chuckled, but there was no humor in it. Just tension. The big one, broad shoulders, shaved head, spoke next. She's not scared. That got their attention. The leader rolled his shoulders, smirk still in place. She doesn't have to be. She just has to cooperate. Naomi exhaled slowly. And if I don't? The leader sighed, running a hand through his hair. Then things get messy. The moment stretched. Then, without warning, one of them moved. Naomi reacted instantly. Naomi moved before the man's hands could close around her. She twisted, ducking under his reach, and drove her elbow into his ribs. He grunted, stumbling back, but another set of hands reached for her from the side. She pivoted, planting her foot and striking out, her knee slamming into his stomach. The man doubled over, gasping, but she had no time to celebrate. More were coming. Two men rushed her at once. Naomi stepped back, her heart steady, her body light. One swung a crowbar. She ducked, the metal slicing through empty air. Before he could recover, she grabbed his wrist, twisted, and wrenched the weapon free. A quick strike to his shin sent him crashing to the dirt. But there were too many. Rough hands grabbed her from behind, yanking her off balance. She fought, thrashing, trying to break free, but another man joined in, his arm locking around her throat. She couldn't breathe. Naomi kicked back, her boot catching someone's knee. A curse. A moment of slack in the grip around her throat. She ripped free, gasping for air, but a fist slammed into her side, knocking her back. Pain exploded through her ribs. Her vision blurred for a second, her body struggling to keep up, but she refused to stop. She lashed out again, catching one man in the jaw, sending him reeling. Then the big one moved. Brick. She had already sized him up earlier. Tall, thick arms. A body built like a battering ram. He didn't hesitate. He lunged, and Naomi had no time to dodge. A freight train of muscle slammed into her. The ground rushed up fast, knocking the air from her lungs as she landed hard. Before she could roll away, Brick pinned her down. His weight crushed against her, his grip tightening around her wrists, forcing them into the dirt. Naomi fought, twisting, but it was no use. He was too strong. Enough, Brick growled. The others hovered nearby, catching their breath, bruised and battered from the fight. The leader Vinny stepped forward, brushing the dust off his jacket. "Well, damn," he muttered, looking her over. His smirk returned. "You're full of surprises." Naomi gritted her teeth, her breath coming hard. Vinny crouched beside her, tilting his head. "You fight too well for a jogger." She stayed silent. Vinny tapped his fingers against his knee, watching her closely. "You military?" She still said nothing. Vinny chuckled. "Brick, let her breathe." Brick shifted slightly, easing up just enough for Naomi to suck in a full breath, but his grip never loosened. Vinny exhaled, shaking his head. "We needed a way past the roadblocks. Looks like we just found it." Naomi met his eyes, her expression cold. "And if I refuse?" Vinny smirked, standing up. "Then we figure something else out." The way he said it made it clear she wouldn't like the alternative. One of the other men, Rust, wiped blood from his busted lip. "We should just take her stuff and move on." Vinny shot him a look. "You think we can just waltz through a checkpoint looking like this?" He gestured to their torn prison uniforms, the stolen clothes. "We need her." Rust didn't argue. Vinny turned back to Naomi. "You walk nice and easy, play along, and nobody gets hurt." Naomi breathed in slow, her chest still aching. She let her body relax just slightly, giving them the illusion she was done fighting. Vinny watched her closely. "Yeah, I didn't think so." He sighed, running a hand through his slicked back hair, before nodding to Brick. "Knock her out." Naomi's body tensed. Brick's grip shifted, and she knew what was coming a second before it happened. A fist crashed against the side of her head. Darkness swallowed her whole. A sharp jolt ripped Naomi from unconsciousness. The van bounced over rough terrain, her body slamming against the cold metal floor. Her wrists burned tied too tight. Duct tape covered her mouth, stiff and unyielding. Her head throbbed, her vision hazy, but she fought to stay alert. The inside of the van smelled of sweat and gasoline. Fugitives filled the space, some watching her, others lost in their own thoughts. Vinny sat in the front passenger seat, speaking low with Rust. Slim, the nervous one, kept glancing back at her, his knee bouncing. His fingers twitched around the gun in his lap. Brick was nearby, arms crossed, breathing slow and steady. Unbothered, Naomi tested the ropes around her wrists. Too tight. No slack. Not yet. Vinny turned in his seat, smirking when he saw her awake. "Welcome back." Naomi said nothing, her breath steady behind the tape. Vinny tilted his head. "You're real quiet now." She held his gaze, unreadable. His smirk widened. "Don't worry. You'll get your turn to talk." Naomi stayed silent, her mind already working through the next step. This wasn't over. Not even close. Naomi stayed still. The van rattled over the uneven dirt road, bouncing her against the cold metal floor. Her wrists ached from the tight ropes, the duct tape across her mouth stiff and unyielding. She kept her breathing slow, steady. Her mind worked through every detail. 8 men, armed, dangerous, but not trained. The leader, Vinny, sat up front speaking in low tones to Rust, the driver. Slim sat beside them, the nervous one, gripping his gun too tight. In the back, Brick leaned against the wall, silent, watching. The others, Grady, Doyle, and Morgan, were tense, bruised from their fight with her earlier. She had hurt them, and they knew it. Vinny turned in his seat, flashing her a smirk. "You awake back there?" Naomi met his eyes, her expression blank behind the tape. He chuckled. "Bet you're wondering what happens next." She didn't blink. Vinny leaned forward slightly. "You play along, you live. You cause trouble, we bury you in the woods. Simple." Brick let out a low grunt. "She's not scared." Vinny's smirk twitched. "Nah, she's just thinking." He tilted his head. "What's the plan, Jogger? Waiting for a rescue?" "Ain't coming." He was wrong. She wasn't waiting. She was planning. Naomi's gaze flicked to the back doors. Locked from the outside. The van itself was old, worn-down seats, rust creeping along the edges. They weren't in a top-tier getaway vehicle. That meant weaknesses. She tested the ropes again, careful, slow. The knot was tight, but the fibers were rough, slightly frayed. Not impossible. The van swerved, hitting a deep rut. The jolt threw her to the side, slamming her against Brick's boot. "Careful, driver," he muttered. Rust growled from the front. "This road's a piece of crap." Vinny ignored them. His focus stayed on her. "You know," he mused, "you made this real messy back there. If you'd just gone down easy, we'd be through a roadblock by now." Naomi didn't react. He smirked. "But I gotta admit, you fight like hell." He leaned back, stretching his arms. "Problem is, fighting's done. You're ours now." She let his words settle. Let them think they had won. Then the van hit another bump. She used the momentum, shifting just enough to stretch her fingers toward her wrists. Almost there. The van turned sharply, the movement throwing her weight to the side. This was it. She snapped her wrists, twisting hard against the rope, feeling the fibers strain. One more jolt. Snap. Her wrists came free. She didn't hesitate. In one smooth motion, she ripped the tape from her mouth and lunged. Her elbow slammed into Grady's throat. He choked, clutching his neck, but she was already moving. Brick grabbed for her. She twisted, dodging his grip, and drove her foot into the van wall. Using it as leverage, she spun, fists flying. Her knuckles cracked against Morgan's jaw. He crumpled. Doyle cursed, reaching for his knife. She caught his wrist, twisting it sharply. The blade clattered to the floor. "Stop her!" Rust shouted from the front. Too late. Naomi's fingers closed around the handle of the back door. She yanked it. Nothing. Still locked. Vinny turned fully in his seat now, gun in hand. "Don't." Naomi didn't let him finish. She spun, driving her foot into Brick's knee. The big man grunted, stumbling, and she used the opening to launch herself at Slim. His hands fumbled for his gun. She was faster. Her fist cracked against his wrist, knocking the weapon loose. It skidded across the floor. For a second, everything was chaos. Then, the van hit another deep rut. It lurched sideways. Naomi used the movement, grabbing the fallen knife and slashing the lock on the back door. A sharp snap, and the door swung open. Wind roared inside. The night blurred past in streaks of dark green and silver. Trees, moonlight, a moving world outside the van. Naomi didn't think. She moved. Hands grabbed for her. She dove. The cold night air hit her like a punch. Her body twisted in freefall. Then she crashed through thick brush, rolling hard down a steep incline. Branches tore at her skin. Dirt filled her lungs. She hit the ground with a force that stole her breath. For a moment she didn't move. Above, the van screeched to a stop. Shouts rang out. Where is she? Find her. She forced herself up, pain screaming through her body. Her ribs ached. Her arms stung. But she was alive. And she was free. Naomi darted into the trees, her mind sharp despite the pain. She had minutes, maybe seconds before they came after her. She had to move. Fast. Footsteps pounded behind her. They were coming. Naomi sprinted through the undergrowth, weaving between trees, keeping her steps light. The forest was thick, but moonlight cut through in slivers, guiding her way. A sharp whistle. A bullet tore through the leaves near her head. They were shooting now. She zigzagged, making herself a harder target. More voices. She went that way. Cut her off. No, they weren't trapping her again. Naomi spotted a ridge ahead, a steep drop leading to a dried-out riverbed below. No time to slow down. She ran straight for it. Another shot closer this time. Then, she leaped. The world tilted. The wind howled. Her body slammed into the sloping rock, rolling hard before crashing into the riverbed. Pain flared everywhere. But she didn't stop. She forced herself up, ignoring the sharp sting in her ribs. Footsteps skidded to a stop above. She jumped. She's dead then. Vinny's voice cut through the night. No, she's alive. A pause. Spread out. Find her. Naomi pressed herself into the shadows, breathing hard. Her heart pounded, but she wasn't afraid. She was angry. They had dragged her into this. They had beaten her, tied her up, tried to use her. Now they were hunting her. Big mistake. She turned, disappearing into the trees. The hunt wasn't over. It had just begun. Vinny sat in the front seat of the van, his fingers drumming against the dashboard. His jaw was clenched, his usual smirk gone. The plan had taken a hit. Naomi had escaped, and now they had to adjust. The others weren't handling it well. Rust sat in the passenger seat, rubbing a hand over his face. We should have killed her when we had the chance. Slim, still gripping his gun too tightly, shot him a look. You really think that would have fixed anything? She's probably dead anyway. Vinny shook his head. No, she's not. The group fell silent. They all knew it. That woman wasn't normal. Brick sat in the back, arms crossed, his face unreadable. She'll come after us. Vinny sighed. Doesn't matter. We're not changing the plan. We stick to it. Rust scoffed. You mean the plan where we drive straight into cops looking like this? He gestured to their dirty, torn clothes. That plan? Vinny shot him a sharp look. No, genius. The plan where we use the backup option. The words hung in the air. Morgan frowned. Backup option? Vinny exhaled through his nose, turning in his seat. You think I didn't plan for this? You think I didn't know we might run into trouble? Rust crossed his arms. Yeah? And what's the brilliant backup? Vinny grinned now, his confidence returning. Collins. That got their attention. Slim's grip on his gun tightened. You sure he's still solid? Vinny smirked. Collins has been running fake IDs and safe houses for years. He's the best. We get to him, we disappear. Rust frowned. We're not even close to the border yet. Vinny leaned back. We don't need to be. Collins gets us clean papers, new names. We walk right through. No roadblocks, no cops breathing down our necks. Morgan still looked unsure. What if he doesn't come through? Vinny's smirk faded slightly. Then we make him. The van hit another bump, jolting them. The road was rough, the night stretching endlessly around them. Slim shifted. Where's the meat? Vinny tapped his fingers against the seat. Farmhouse. Middle of nowhere. Should be a straight shot from here. Rust let out a breath. Great. Another detour. Vinny shot him a look. You wanna drive in circles until the cops corner us? Rust didn't answer. Brick finally spoke. And if she's not dead? Silence. They all knew who he meant. Vinny's smirk twitched. Then we take care of it before she finds us. Morgan's knee bounced. You saw what she did back there. She's dangerous, man. Vinny's smirk returned fully now. Yeah, but so are we. Meanwhile, Naomi crouched in the undergrowth, her breath steady despite the pain in her ribs. She had been running for hours, using the cover of darkness to stay ahead of them. But she wasn't running anymore. She was tracking them. The van's tire marks were fresh, cutting through the dirt road. They hadn't taken the highway. They were moving towards something. A meeting. A place to regroup. She had spent years hunting men like them. She knew how they thought. And she wasn't going to let them disappear. Naomi inhaled deeply, forcing herself forward. She wasn't done. Not yet. Naomi moved fast, staying low as she weaved through the dense forest. Every muscle in her body screamed, but she ignored the pain. She had no time for it. The fugitives thought she was dead. That mistake would cost them. She followed the tire tracks, her sharp eyes scanning for any clue about their destination. The dirt road twisted ahead, leading away from the highway, deeper into the wilderness. They were meeting someone. A contact. She had to stop them before they disappeared. Her ribs ached from the earlier fight, but she pushed forward, her breath steady. The night was quiet, except for the distant hum of an engine. She was getting close. She slowed, keeping to the shadows as she neared a small rise. Carefully, she climbed to the top, peering through the thick branches. There, a farmhouse sat in a clearing below, barely visible in the dim moonlight. A single truck was parked out front. The van was gone. Naomi narrowed her eyes. They were inside. She counted 3 figures outside, standing near the porch, talking in low voices. 2 were armed. She had no weapon, no backup, but she didn't need them. She scanned the area, looking for an opening. The barn was to the side, its large doors slightly open. It was a good place to move unnoticed. She slipped through the trees, every step careful. If they saw her before she was ready, she wouldn't get another chance. As she neared the barn, she crouched behind an old stack of crates. The men on the porch were still talking, unaware. She inhaled slowly. Then she moved. She slipped into the barn's shadows, her eyes adjusting to the dark. Inside, the space was cluttered, rusted tools, hay bales, an old tractor. But her focus locked onto something else. A rifle, leaning against the wall. Luck. She moved toward it, silent, careful not to disturb the hay beneath her boots. Her fingers closed around the weapon. Footsteps. She froze. Someone was coming. A figure appeared in the doorway, backlit by the moon. He was alone. Morgan. Naomi reacted instantly. She lunged, swinging the rifle. The butt of the gun slammed into his temple. Morgan crumpled without a sound. She caught him before he hit the ground, lowering him gently. Then, she grabbed the rope from her pocket, taken from her own wrists hours ago, and tied his hands behind his back. One down. She had to move fast now. The men outside would notice he was gone soon. Naomi slipped back toward the farmhouse, the rifle now in her grip. A flicker of movement near the window. Vinny. He was pacing inside, talking to someone out of sight. She had to take him out first. She positioned herself, took a slow breath, and raised the rifle. Then, a voice behind her. "Drop it." Her muscles tensed. She turned slowly. Russ stood a few feet away, gun in hand. His eyes were sharp, but there was something else there. Uncertainty. He wasn't sure about this anymore. Naomi held his gaze, keeping her breathing steady. "You don't want to do this." Rust's grip tightened on his gun. "You think you can just walk away?" She took a step closer. "You know Vinny's gonna cut you loose the second you're not useful. He's using you." Rust hesitated. That was all she needed. Naomi moved. She grabbed the barrel of his gun, twisting it away as she slammed her knee into his stomach. Rust gasped, stumbling backward. She wrenched the weapon from his grasp and swung the rifle, knocking him out cold. "Two down." Shouts from inside. They had heard. She didn't wait. She kicked the farmhouse door open. Vinny spun, reaching for his gun. Naomi fired. The bullet hit the floor near his feet, stopping him cold. His hands shot up, his smirk faltering. All right. Let's talk." Naomi stepped inside, keeping the rifle steady. "You don't get to talk." Grady stood nearby, frozen. He eyed the back door, calculating his chances. Naomi saw it. She fired again, this time at the door handle. Grady flinched. "No one's running," she said. Vinny sighed, shaking his head. "You're full of surprises." Naomi's voice was ice. "And you're out of time." The sound of approaching sirens filled the night. Vinny cursed under his breath. Naomi took a step closer. "You lose." The front door burst open, officers flooding inside, weapons raised. Vinny barely had time to react before he was forced to the ground, cuffs snapping around his wrists. Grady tried to bolt. He didn't make it 2 steps before he was tackled. Rust groaned from outside, waking just as officers dragged him upright. Naomi lowered the rifle, exhaling. It was over. For now, Naomi stood in the clearing, watching as the police secured the fugitives. The farmhouse was surrounded now, red and blue lights flashing against the trees. Officers moved fast, locking down the scene. Vinny was cuffed, shoved into the back of a police cruiser. He wasn't smirking anymore. His jaw was tight, his eyes dark with frustration. Naomi met his gaze. He glared at her. "This isn't over." She tilted her head slightly. "Yeah, it is." The door slammed shut, cutting off whatever weak comeback he had left. Carter walked up beside her, arms crossed. "That's 4 down." Naomi nodded. 4 to go. Carter sighed, rubbing his jaw. "We're running out of time." She already knew that. The others wouldn't wait. With their safe house compromised, they'd go straight to the next contact. "Collins." Naomi turned. "I need a car." Carter exhaled. "You're not going alone." She gave him a look. He sighed again. "Fine, but we move now." Minutes later, Naomi was behind the wheel of an unmarked vehicle, speeding down the dirt road. Carter sat beside her, scanning the GPS. "Collins' last known location is a motel near the county line," he said. "If they're meeting him, we're cutting it close." Naomi kept her grip firm on the wheel, her focus sharp. "They think they're still ahead of us. That's our advantage." Carter tapped his fingers against the door. "Yeah, well, let's hope they don't figure it out before we get there." The road stretched ahead, dark and empty. Naomi pushed the car faster. They had one shot at this, and she wasn't going to miss. 30 miles away, Rust sat in a parked sedan, his fingers drumming against the dashboard. Grady sat beside him, flipping a knife between his fingers. "This feels off." Rust exhaled through his nose. "We don't have a choice." Brick leaned against the hood of the car, arms crossed. "Collins said he'd be here." Grady scoffed. "Yeah? And how do we know he hasn't already cut and run?" Rust didn't answer. "Because he wasn't sure." They were running out of options. Collins had always been reliable until now. And with Vinny and the others gone, they were on their own. Brick pushed off the car. We wait another 5 minutes. If he doesn't show, we move without him. Rust's grip on the wheel tightened. Move where? Brick's face was unreadable. Anywhere but here. The wind picked up, rattling the motel sign overhead. The lot was mostly empty, only a few scattered vehicles in sight. Too quiet. Rust shifted uneasily. Something didn't feel right. Naomi killed the headlights as she pulled up to the edge of the lot. She and Carter sat in the shadows, watching. There. Carter pointed. 3 of them. Naomi studied them. Brick stood near the car, his posture relaxed but alert. Rust was still in the driver's seat. Grady sat beside him, restless, flipping his knife. Collins was nowhere in sight. "They're waiting," she murmured. Carter's voice was tight. "How do you want to play this?" Naomi reached for her sidearm. "We don't give them a chance to run." She stepped out, moving fast. Carter followed, covering her. They were 10 feet away when Rust finally looked up. His eyes widened. "Go." Naomi lunged. She grabbed Rust before he could start the car, yanking the door open and slamming him against the frame. Grady cursed, reaching for his knife. Carter had him first, shoving him against the dashboard. Brick moved, but Naomi spun, gun aimed. "Don't!" Brick's eyes flickered, calculating. Then he raised his hands. Grady growled, struggling against Carter's grip. "This is a damn setup." Carter smirked. "Took you long enough to figure that out." Rust groaned under Naomi's grip. "You should have killed us when you had the chance." Naomi's expression didn't change. "You're not worth the bullet." Sirens wailed in the distance. Rust closed his eyes. He knew it was over. 10 minutes later, the last 3 fugitives were in cuffs. Naomi stood near the police cars, watching them get hauled away. Brick barely reacted. Grady spat curses at anyone who came near. Rust sat in the back of a cruiser, staring blankly out the window. Carter let out a long breath. "That's 7. Naomi nodded. "1 more." Carter shook his head. "Collins is still out there." Naomi's jaw tightened. Collins had vanished the second things went bad. He was the key to everything, and she was going to find him. Carter studied her. "You're not stopping, are you?" Naomi turned toward the road. "Not until this is finished." Miles away, in a darkened warehouse, a burner phone rang. Collins picked it up, his fingers steady despite the sweat on his brow. A voice on the other end spoke. "They caught them." Collins exhaled. "All of them?" Silence. Then, "She's still looking for you." Collins ran a hand down his face. He had played this game for years, staying ahead, always moving. But now there was no one left to protect him. His stomach twisted, because he knew what was coming. And Naomi Cole never stopped hunting. Collins wiped the sweat from his brow, his fingers gripping the edge of the desk. The dim light in the warehouse buzzed faintly, flickering every few seconds. He hadn't moved in hours, waiting, thinking. He had heard the news. The others were gone. One by one they had fallen. Now he was alone. His burner phone sat on the table, its screen dark. No more calls. No backup. Just silence. Then, a sound. A creak, barely noticeable, but Collins heard it. Someone was here. His pulse quickened. He grabbed the gun from his desk, his hands shaking as he pointed it toward the entrance. The metal door was locked, but the shadows near the back of the warehouse felt different. Wrong. His throat tightened. "Who's there?" Silence. Then, a whisper of movement. Collins fired. The shot echoed, sparks flying as the bullet hit metal. Nothing. He swallowed hard, stepping back. His breath came fast, his nerves stretched thin. Then, a voice. Low. Cold. "You missed." Collins spun, his heart slamming against his ribs. Naomi. She stepped from the shadows, her gun aimed steady at his chest. Collins took another step back. Listen. Naomi's eyes were ice. Drop it. His fingers twitched on the trigger. I won't say it again. Collins hesitated. His mind raced. He could still run, still find a way out. But Naomi saw it. The moment he shifted, she moved. A single shot rang out. Collins gasped as the gun flew from his hand, a sharp pain shooting through his wrist. He clutched it, breathless. Naomi kept her weapon raised. I told you to drop it. He groaned, stumbling back. You need me. Her expression didn't change. No, I don't. Collins swallowed hard. I can help you. Like you helped them? Her voice was calm, but there was steel beneath it. Collins licked his lips. Look, I just ran. Naomi finished for him. He flinched. You set them up with new names, new lives. You gave them a way out. She stepped closer, her footsteps slow, deliberate. But they lost, she said. And now, so do you. Collins let out a sharp breath. You don't have to do this. Naomi's head tilted slightly. You think I'm going to kill you? His throat bobbed. She stepped even closer now, close enough that he could see the bruises along her jaw, the cuts on her arms. You had a choice, she said quietly. You chose the wrong side. Collins tensed. What now? Naomi's gaze didn't waver. You run, she said simply. Collins blinked. What? She lowered her weapon just slightly, nodding toward the back door. Go. Collins hesitated. Then, without another word, he turned and bolted. His feet pounded against the floor, his breath coming in sharp gasps. He shoved open the door, stumbling into the night. Freedom. But the second he stepped outside, blinding lights, sirens, gun barrels aimed at his chest. He skidded to a stop, heart hammering. Behind him, Naomi's voice was calm. You never had a way out. Collins turned slowly as she stepped into the doorway, arms crossed. You were always going to lose. Collins clenched his jaw as officers rushed forward, shoving him against a patrol car, locking cuffs around his wrists. Naomi watched as he was dragged away. Carter stepped up beside her, exhaling. You let him think he could run. Naomi gave a small shrug. It was the only way to make sure he didn't fight. Carter shook his head with a slight smirk. You're something else. She didn't answer. She just watched. The last fugitive was in custody. The hunt was over. For now, the station was quiet. The kind of quiet that only came after something big. Naomi sat on the edge of a desk, an ice pack pressed against her bruised knuckles. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, the scent of coffee lingering in the air. Across the room, Collins sat in an interrogation cell, wrists cuffed to the table. He wasn't talking. Didn't matter. The case was closed. 8 fugitives captured. Their escape dismantled. Carter leaned against the wall beside her. They'll never see the outside again. Naomi nodded. She already knew that. Collins would talk eventually. He had too many secrets, too many loose ends. But Naomi wasn't thinking about him anymore. She was thinking about the next fight. Because there would always be another. Men like Vinny, Rust, and Collins didn't disappear. New names, new faces, different crimes. But the same story. Carter studied her. You should take a break. Naomi exhaled, rolling her shoulder. Maybe. But she knew she wouldn't. Because this wasn't just a job. It never had been. Carter smirked. You're impossible. She smirked back. You wouldn't have it any other way. Outside, the first light of dawn crept over the city. The night was over. For now,